Joe Holbrook here, the Cloud Tech Guy. I want to do a quick shout out about the GCP Cloud Architect exam. This exam was updated the first week or so of November, I believe November 7th. And it is important to give you an update because there are some significant changes to the exam. Let's talk about it and then get into the top 10. The first thing I want to just point out is that this exam was clearly upgraded. Yes, my friends, it seemed like they made a serious effort to remove any questions that were too ambiguous, poorly written. It looked like they retained some good talent to take care of this exam finally. Okay, the case studies. There was one thing to point out, I think, that you may have noticed as well is they did remove one case study. Now, what I did like about the case study questions on the exam was that they were in sequential order. The last time I remember I took the exam, that was not the case, and I felt like I was going back and forth between case studies. That was sort of an irritation, and it removed your focus. This here, they did ask about the same case study, 2, 3, 4 questions in a row, made it sort of easy for you to focus on just that case study. Now, I don't know if that's for everyone or if I just got lucky like that. Who knows? Love to hear feedback on that. The last thing to point out is the testing platform. For me, Criterion is not really beneficial. It provides almost no value. And what I mean by this is I'm in a city of 800,000 people. And, we're not exactly a small city, but we're not a large city either. We're right in the middle. And there's only one testing center that I could take the exam at. So I have two choices. I got to make my schedule fit for the exam in a community college that's only testing 3 days a week, only when school's in session. So it's not really helpful to the Google Cloud, the Google Cloud Platform cause, I guess. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Now, the other thing is that it just seems like they can never find your information and you can never sign in. And it just seems like they have some issues between Google and Criterion that occurs pretty frequently. I don't know if that's just me, but I've gotten a lot of feedback from previous students as well. So I'm hoping the next exam around, they're going to go to a new platform and it won't be Criterion. Okay, let's get into the top 10. The first thing to point out is I just want to make sure that you're aware that with this exam, it is definitely more developer focused. What I mean is you're going to definitely want to know somewhat more about CI pipelines, the Google services that go along with a pipeline that, could be architected around, GKE, Cloud Build, Cloud Repositories, Cloud Pub Sub, on and on and on. Now, another thing to point out is that this exam does test you outside of the Google Cloud Platform. And what I mean by that is this. The exam just doesn't ask you about, for example, if you take in the AWS exams, they typically just talk about platform-related questions and capabilities. They don't ask about developer best practices or how to debug a script or A/B testing around that, or what is, should the customer look at an agile process or waterfall process? It wasn't really like that. Google Cloud looks at things a little differently. You're going to definitely need to know a lot more about cloud development than I would, think you need to know for AWS. That's just my thought. Now, the number 3, the thing to point out is that you want to know how to migrate a VM from on-prem to Google Cloud, but also how to migrate storage from another cloud provider as well or on-prem. Know your migration best practices understand the capabilities of Google Cloud Platform around those merits. Some of the case study questions will definitely be testing your knowledge on what the customer can do around getting off of their platform or their on-prem, and how do you get them to Google Cloud. And you'll need to apply what the case study says to your answer. Load balancing. Without saying much more about load balancing, it's a wide area. We all know that. You need to know the difference between the load balancing options, but also when you're reading the case study questions, be aware that there could be two very good options that are selected, and it could be just the difference between you understanding that one service is regional versus the other, or something that might direct you to an answer that requires a dedicated IP address for a global IP address, that is, versus maybe not needing one. Once again, know where to go with that. Another thing to focus on is cloud security. A lot of questions on this. When I say out of 50-something questions, probably 7 or 8 questions around security. So it was fairly heavily tested. With identity and access management, you need to know how to handle auditors. Seemed like there's a lot of questions around auditors and how to mitigate, audit logs, but also give permissions to the auditors. As part of that, you need to know stack driver capabilities. I didn't put it in there, but just a thought. Also, to service accounts. How do you maintain service accounts? But once again, it's sort of, a lot of it really comes down to you looking at the case study questions and applying the way Google would want you to apply. That doesn't mean that the answer that you're selecting initially is wrong. In the real world, it's just you need to know that Google uses the least privilege approach, that their thought to cloud security is all encompassing. Now, before I get to the remaining top 5, I just want to point out a few things on the case study areas before we proceed. You'll need to, of course, go to the exam page, proceed over here to where it says exam guide and case studies. Select that, and then what you want to do is go scroll down, and you'll see that they have sample case studies here. For example, they did take out Genco Mart, but these 3 are still fair game. I would recommend you read through each of these and try to establish in your mind, when you look at these, a couple things. You'll notice that they have business requirements, they have technical requirements, and then they also have an executive statement. Now, generally, the questions focus on the business or the technical requirements. And then what you need to do is, well, basically what they'll do is they'll give you a scenario saying that the customer, Mark Kirk Games, is trying to, meet their business requirements. And they want to increase their global footprint. And then they'll ask you about, how to do this around, let's say, SQL. And you'll need to know the capacity of Cloud SQL versus, for example, Cloud Spanner. But also as part of that, they'll talk about, for example, mobile, and it's actually right here. You'll need to, and again, I can't tell you exactly how it'll go on the exam, but I can sort of give you a hint around maybe how you want to focus your studies before you take this exam, and then when you get to the exam, how you need to approach the case studies. Generally, the case study questions are going to focus on the business requirements, the technical requirements, and they'll give you the requirements you'll need to focus on here. And then one question perhaps will be around the executive statement and how do you address the infrastructure requirements to meet what the executives are looking for. And that's one case study. Then if we go to dress for a win, you will see that this is more detailed around the technical environment. And this will help you greatly in a lot of cases to sort of understand, can MySQL be migrated to Cloud SQL or Cloud Spanner? Or when it comes to compute, would we want to go basically with Compute Engine, Kubernetes Engine, App Engine, or Cloud Functions? Now they're talking about microservices, but in the question itself, they'll expand on the scenario that you have here and ask you, what would be the proper workflow of the services you'd specify. So for example, you would need to specify the storage type, the database type, perhaps the virtual machine platform you need to use, etc. Or you might get a question around the technical requirements and how do you meet each of these? Does the solution meet each of these? Once again, you need to know enough about each of the solutions to be able to be dangerous for the exam. What I mean by that is you need to understand, how does load balancing address this? Or how does an automation framework provision resources in the cloud? For example, when you see anything with automation, it's probably going to be related to some kind of container deployment in a lot of cases. Not exclusively, but it's probably a good start to start looking at that. Failover of the production environment. What do you do? Encrypt the data on the wire and at rest. Well, that's an interesting one because, again, you need to realize Google's capabilities with encryption, but does it actually encrypt data on the wire? So how would you address that, for example? A lot of things to consider here when you're looking at the exam. So let's move on to the remaining 5. Number 6, you need to know storage pretty well here, and the reason is because you're going to get a good amount of questions, not just on cloud storage capabilities, but also around other examples such as, data store, big table, BigQuery, just the data services in general. So with that said, this is going to be a good amount of the exam questions. It could be, 20 to 30% just around what are the data storage options and the data services. Also, I didn't throw in there other services that may be complementary to these services, such as Cloud PubSub, for example, or some of the APIs. One of the things that I think it was really sort of developer heavy on was around cloud endpoints and APIs, which I didn't have in the top 10 here, but just another thought you may want to look at. Exam is definitely more focused on cloud architecture than perhaps just the cloud platform capabilities and options. So it's not just a speed and feed exam or a feature exam. It's testing you a little outside the limits of maybe just what you would expect, like with an AWS exam where it just teaches you about AWS and tests you on it, and they're not going to talk about, for example, the difference between agile and waterfall, or they're not going to talk about how do you address a CI pipeline, or how do you debug a Python script. So that's what I was trying to get at, is some of the questions are definitely outside of just Google and Google Cloud. We also, I'd also recommend this as well. Make sure you know the different billing approaches, especially, why you want to use a project, an organization, but also, too, know how to mitigate costs for customers. For example, if the customer is using a virtual machine over so many hours per month, maybe it makes sense for them to get a dedicated instance, a reserved instance, for example, over just using an on-demand approach. With that said, know your billing options. Also, too, Google does discount the services quite significantly, and you might want to know what an inferred approach to billing is as well. But with that said, just know the general basics of billing and cost reduction as well. Lastly, Cloud Spanner and Cloud SQL, know your scaling requirements around those. Once again, definitely know SQL and how to bring SQL into the cloud, but how to scale it in the cloud. Anything that's, a relational database will be tested somewhat. So definitely take some time knowing that as well. Okay, let's move on. So a couple things, I do have some courses on Google Cloud on different platforms. Expect to see some more down the road in January as well. But with that said, I do host live classes on Pearson for Cloud Architect and Cloud Engineer, as well as a few more that are in the pipeline, but I won't announce them until the contract has been finalized. I also have courses on Udemy as well, and certainly other platforms to be announced as well. With that said, do expect a cloud developer course to be out shortly. I'm pretty excited about that exam as well. I'm going to wish everybody luck on the exam when you take it. Let me know any feedback, anything that you may have seen that I didn't address as well. Once again, this is mainly focused on the top 10. I wish you all the best of luck.